Hello, everybody, and welcome back to JTA Sports. I'm Ethan.
I'm Matthew.
I'm Jackson.
And what are we doing today, Matt?
Talking about sports.
Thank you. This is our 19th episode, where today we're going to be doing a more Last Dance review. This is something I've been doing more on my WCAT announcements, but we're going to be doing a little bit more in depth as we pick our favorite episodes, and maybe we'll get into our MJ versus LeBron debate. Even though we're more of all MJ people, we'll see how interesting we could still get into that conversation. But before we get into that, we'll start with our favorite Last Dance episodes, because for those who don't know, the Last Dance actually ended yesterday, where the 9th and 10th episodes came out of Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls' Last Dance documentary, where it goes through 10 episodes of the entire dynasty of the Bulls, where they won 6 championships. It was super, super amazing. The documentary is one of the best I've ever watched by far. So we're going to be picking our favorite of the 10 episodes. So without further ado, why don't we get into it?
All right, Matthew, go ahead and start.
All right, so going through all of the Last Dance, and I think that the most jam-packed episode and the more entertaining one, where we get to see not only the Bulls, but just everybody and some of the best NBA stars, was the Dream Team episode. For those of you who don't know, that was episode 5, where we got the whole MJ Magic, Larry Bird, the whole Dream Team. We got the whole Nike signing over Converse, where at the time Converse dominated the NBA scene in terms of basketball shoes, and that was really the conversion is when Michael Jordan signed with Nike. And, I think that whole episode was just – and Tony Kukoc, when that whole thing happened in Croatia, and how Jerry Krause, this little golden boy from Croatia, and Kukoc. And, I just think this episode was really just well-balanced. You have at the beginning MJ signing with Nike over some of the bigger companies when he didn't want to sign with Nike. It was his mother who convinced him to go out there and just take a visit to Nike, and then all of a sudden, and his agent too, and then all of a sudden, he signs with Nike on a giant contract, and that was really when the flip began from Converse to Nike. He was the trailblazer to start it all, and I think going back through that was really cool. And then we got to see the Dream Team and how that whole thing played out, why and how Zeke was left out. And we got players like Patrick Ewing, David Robinson, and all of those NBA superstars alongside Michael Jordan and all of them. And that was really cool just to see how it meshed and how well they dominated in 1992. No team came close to beating them, and it's because there's just no talent level better than that. Because before 1992, you didn't have any NBA players playing for the Olympic teams. That was the first one where MJ played for them, and that really just built a whole thing for USA Olympic basketball. That's the reason why I think that's my favorite episode.
Yes, I mean, sadly, the Dream Team really isn't such thing anymore, because nobody ever goes into Olympics because they're all too scared. It's about their reputation being ruined all the time. But the episodes, or at least episode number 5, was very, very interesting. One thing you didn't mention was that they actually got to Kobe was actually in episode number 5, and how he was one of the guys that he got to finally give his opinion. We got to see Kobe alive and well, which is very touching for those who had such a great relationship with him. And it was great to see him giving these very interesting opinions and having all this. So it was great to see Kobe in this documentary. That was another great part in episode 5. I mean, Jackson, you have anything else?
Sorry to interrupt you, but not to mention the 19-year-old NBA All-Star Kobe Bryant. Seeing how he dominated. And he started too, right? Didn't he start? I think, right? And just seeing how he dominated then and how it's just grown since. MJ and Kobe were so relatable in the way that they played the game and how and their uprising and stuff like that through basketball. So it was very nice to see that. I forgot about that. Thank you.
All right. Do you have any honorable mentions episodes that you were going to add?
Yeah, I would say episode 3 with Dennis. And I think because when I look back at the NBA, one of the more interesting players in NBA history, if not the most, it's probably the most, Dennis Rodman. Just such a weird character. He was unpredictable. He is the definition of unpredictable. one night he'll be out partying with Carmen Electra in Vegas, and the next morning he'll be dyeing his hair a color that you've never seen before. And I think that is what made Rodman such a character. He brought in revenue, but yet every time you needed him to do something, he was an elite player. He was one of the greatest hustlers the league has ever seen, one of the greatest rebounders the league has ever seen, and it's just interesting to see an inside story from his perspective on how things went with the Bulls team then. So I was a big fan of that episode.
Yeah, I mean, you can go, Jackson.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I can definitely see that. It was really cool, at least in that episode, to learn a lot about him. And just, I was talking with my stepdad because I was watching the last 2 episodes this morning. Apparently one of the other nicknames that Dennis Rodman had was the Spider. So he wasn't just like the Worm, as most people call him. Apparently he was also called the Spider because, according to people at the time, he was all arms and legs. So they called him the Spider. And I looked at him like, what the hell are you talking about? He's like, yeah, they called him the Spider. I'm like, okay. So, but yeah, that was really cool.
I mean, I think Dennis Rodman, it was just so weird seeing him without his wild hair and his wild nature on the Pistons when we first saw him. Because the people see him, as soon as you search up Dennis Rodman, there's 0 pictures that come up with him when he's on the Detroit Pistons and the Bad Boys. It's just him looking normal, like an innocent kid from where when he was drafted right away out of the NBA. And now looking back at him now, it's like, how did he even get to that point where he is now? But I guess he was just set free, and that's just him being him. And then the whole motorcycle story, I don't know if you mentioned that with his Vegas trip that he had. That was another very interesting thing where he just decided to just take a break.
I need a vacation. Yeah, just randomly in the middle of the season. Let's take a vacation. Let's go to Vegas.
You do not see that if anyone did that nowadays, the world would just come to a stop. Like it's just with all this media nowadays, it would just come to a stop. So it's just hilarious seeing that how this even happened and how even the Bulls just kind of let it happen, and how Michael Jordan had to go get Dennis Rodman in Vegas, which is just hilarious to have the greatest of all time player go looking for you in Vegas just because you decided to take a little bit longer vacation than you said you were going to. But that's
and you know what the craziest? Yeah, that's Dennis Rodman for you. And you know what the craziest part of the whole thing is when he came back, he played better than he did in the beginning of the season. He came back better than before by going to Vegas. That's Dennis Rodman for you, I guess. I really don't know what else to say.
That would be in today's game. That'd be the equivalent of like Indiana Pacers Lance Stevenson going to Vegas during the 2013 or 2014 Eastern Conference Finals.
It's like, okay, it's just unheard of, but it's just Dennis Rodman being Dennis Rodman. It was kind of funny seeing him do his whole change to him becoming a Bull eventually, and how the Bulls even somehow ended up with him after being MJ's complete and utter rival, ends up on his team. And I think another favorite part before we move on from this honorable mention from Matthew was that his interview where he told the people how he is so smart with the rebounds, how he's like, oh, if it bounces off, it goes boom, here, it goes here, and it's just like going like this, and then everyone's just kind of like staring at him like, what are you talking about? What is this guy doing? And it's like, it's just somehow he literally knows where the ball is going to go off of, just off the base of the rim, and how he has the reaction skills. I was watching some replays of him just rebounding. He would be rebounding against the biggest guys like Patrick Ewing, a little bit of Shaquille, Horace Grant, all these guys when they were going. He's just going up against them, and he's somehow winning these rebounds, and he's like a foot shorter, it looks like, compared to them. It's just because of how he knows exactly how to do it, and he's just obviously the Worm, the Spider, whatever nickname you want to give him. He just knows exactly where the ball is going. It's just crazy to see a guy be able to be that smart, at the same time crazy. But Dennis Rodman is a character, and somehow a GOAT that just decides to keep being himself, I guess.
We'll never forget.
Alrighty, we'll move on to your favorite episode and your honorable mention, Jackson.
All right. So after watching all of them, I gotta say my favorite is episode 8, just because uh, part of it is because we actually got to see some baseball, which I haven't got to see in a while. But no, seriously, it was cool to see why he decided to do baseball and all this kind of stuff, and it was kind of cool to finally get they debunked the secret suspension conspiracy theory that all the gambling stuff, that he was suspended because of it for 18 months. And it was cool to see MJ get a little emotional when they were talking about the fact that people thought that it was his gambling problem was why his dad was killed. And people in the media thought that. And it's just like, it can show how sometimes how ruthless the media can be when it comes to getting a story. But also just seeing him come back and how raw he was after he won the championship on Father's Day against Seattle. So yeah, I really like that one. It's I think overall we've seen MJ very reserved, all of us, because we never got to saw him play. But to see him be more human than we've been able to see was really cool.
Yeah, him being displayed as a complete god growing up, because all the people would talk about is him being Air Jordan, the greatest of all time, and us watching Space Jam every single week or every single month growing up, because that's what you had to do as a kid. Basically, you be watching it all the time, but just being able to see MJ on a more human-like play where he was actually showing emotion towards it, especially when he won that championship and he was on the floor crying. I think it was the first championship in his second three-peat. That one was very touching. It was very, very I think it was the very, very end of episode 8, I believe. But it was very interesting to see him that emotional. But I think another part that I liked about it is just seeing how angry MJ got after losing to Horace Grant's Orlando Magic in the playoffs, and how that determination literally sparked this entire second three-peat. And it's like, oh, thanks to Shaq and the Orlando Magic and Horace Grant, to all them for sparking MJ to really make him do that, and shows how really determined he could really get to winning games, especially because he's not used to losing. So, and that his
love how Horace Grant was mentioned before Shaq.
And Penny.
Oh, Penny Hart was in too. But Horace Grant was more talked about, and he was a former Bull, so that's
yeah, fair enough.
And I just find it funny throughout this whole thing, that all the episodes, that Jordan would find one random thing that he would get mad about and then just completely dominate whoever he was playing. Like when they were talking about the Trailblazers finals, he's like, when they were comparing him and Clyde Drexler, he's like, I took offense to being compared to Clyde Drexler. And then it was LeBradford Smith, who was playing for the Bullets at the time, and he drops 30-some points in a game against the Bulls. And then Jordan goes out, oh yeah, I'm gonna. And it actually ended up being fake, that this kid, the reason that Jordan went off on him is because he said, good game, Mike. That actually didn't happen, which is hilarious. It's like, yeah, I made it up so that way I dropped 37 in the first half on him. It's like, how freaking psychotic do you have to be to make up a story just to completely dominate someone at basketball?
That's MJ for you. What can I tell you?
That's just is exactly how the man is, and that's just you don't mess with greatness.
Well said.
I'll quickly go into my honorable mention. It's the end of episode 10, because throughout all of this, we've been kind of when we first talked about it, I was blaming the Jerrys. It was like, oh, it's Reinsdorf and Krause's fault that they disassembled the team after the 98 season. But it was cool to see after they won the 6th championship that Reinsdorf attempted to keep the band together. He called up Phil Jackson and said, hey, I want you to come back for another year. And it just kind of, it was also cool for Phil Jackson's side, because he could easily said, screw Jerry Krause, I'm coming back. But it was very nice of him to say, like, yeah, I'm going to step aside. That's not fair to him. And just to see, like, Jordan talked about, I would have signed a 1-year deal. Steve Kerr would have signed a 1-year deal. Rodman would have signed a 1-year deal. Scotty would have been tough, but if I was there and Rodman was there and Phil Jackson was there, he was going to come back. And so that, at least for me, I'm a general manager oriented person. So just starting to think about how all that could work and things like that and seeing it from that side, it makes me upset, but also it's like they at least, Reinsdorf gave it a shot. And it was just like, in the end, it's still all Jerry Krause's fault. So.
Exactly. I mean, the man, Jerry Krause, this documentary just shat on him basically the entire way through. But in the end,
Accurate.
I mean, as whatever people say, I mean, MJ said it himself. He called Jerry Krause the greatest general manager of all time. So
Right.
no matter what people say it bad about him, and I know he ended this dynasty maybe earlier than it should have, but he did create it in the first place, and he is the one to thank for it. So the credit you got to give credit where credit is due, and that's where Jerry deserves the credit. But another thing I liked inside this, the episode 10 was probably the thing right before the end, like in the finale part where they were, Phil Jackson got the entire team to sit down around a bonfire, and they had everyone write a letter. And Michael Jordan actually wrote a poem that really surprised everybody. So basically, everyone wrote letters, and then they'd read it out to everyone, and they'd throw it in the fire. And then MJ actually wrote a poem, which everyone was completely surprised about, because that shows even MJ showing more emotion, more human than people expected.
Mm-hmm.
But it was great to just see how they actually had a peaceful ending to this dynasty than others may have thought. So I think it was very cool how they showed that and how they shared that in the very end. And episode 10 was definitely one of the better episodes.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. So yeah, go ahead, Ethan. Let us know your favorite and your honorable mention.
Alrighty, so I'm more of I like the more entertaining aspect of the episodes of The Last Dance. So by far, I think episode 4 was pretty much more of the interesting ones, because it was a mix of Phil Jackson's background, his triangle offense, and then how they overcame the bad boys of the Detroit Pistons. Just the bad boys versus the Bulls, just the stories between those two was just unbelievably interesting between the two. Just listening to all the feuds that they had. And this is when Rodman was still on the bad boys Pistons. So, and all those, just how rough they played against these players. Like, if anybody did that in any type of sport nowadays, there'd be suspensions everywhere. It's like Vontaze Burfict, but playing like 12 of him on one team. It's like, just like, you don't expect that from everybody, just to be that ruthless. But to see a team have that much success, and then the Bulls actually overcoming it, and show that the Bulls, before, like, MJ had to earn his respect and trust by beating these Pistons, just like every other team, like the Larry Bird and the Celtics and Magic Johnson and all his Lakers, how they always had to overcome something. MJ had to overcome the Pistons, who were 2-time championships. They had to stop them from getting their three-peat, and then how all that happened. And then learning about Phil Jackson's background was even more interesting, to say the least, how he's a big Zen guy, a very peaceful guy, so to speak. Loves his peace, and this random guy, and then didn't really play that much in the NBA, magically became a coach, and then was coaching in some foreign states, like some foreign places, and he had so much success there, and that's how he ended up on a starting role as an assistant coach, and then how they eventually made it his way up to the top. And then now Phil Jackson is literally like one of the best coaches ever. I mean, the man has 20 winning seasons. Yeah, the best, greatest coach of all time. He has 20 winning seasons. He has 11 championships as a coach. He can't even fit that on all 10 of his fingers, his rings. And then he also has
an 11th finger.
Exactly. I mean, the man is like the literal GOAT for coaches, if there's anyone to be. So it's crazy to see where Phil Jackson came from, because personally, I had no idea who Phil Jackson was before this documentary. So learning more about him, I knew MJ, I knew Scottie Pippen, I knew Rodman, but I had no idea who their head coach was, Phil Jackson. So learning about his background was very, very interesting, and that's why I enjoyed that. And then the whole Isaiah Thomas feud with MJ in episode 4 with the Bad Boys was also very interesting, made a lot of memes. So that's why I liked episode number 4.
You know, something that's really interesting to me, too, is I go back to the Bad Boys. And, you know, I was having this conversation with my dad. Bill Lembier at the time was one of the most physical people out there. And we're not going to talk personality-wise because I think he was an asshole. But the thing is, how long would Bill Lembier last in today's NBA without getting completely either A, banned, B, suspended for extended periods of time? It's so interesting how different the game is now than it was then. Because everybody on that Bad Boys Pistons team would be screwed in today's era, especially Lembier. And I just think that it's so interesting now just to see back then and look at now and how much the NBA and the whole game really has changed.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely.
I mean, you can go, Jackson.
Yeah. And just, it's just really weird watching all of this play. And it's like, some of it is similar to how it is now, but seeing all the physicality and how Bill Lambier literally just lay people out, it's like, how are they able to get away with that? And it's just, part of me is happy that it's no longer like that, but I'm also kind of like, man, I would have loved to watch basketball during that time. So, and the quick update, I just looked, Phil Jackson actually overall has 13 championships.
13,
11,
I know. Yeah.
13 or 11 as a coach, 2 as a player with the Knicks.
Mm-hmm.
He was pretty good with the Knicks. I think people forget about that because, you know, the 11 coaching rings with the Bulls and the Lakers. But, like, he was not that bad of a player. He was very similar. He just was never to the fullest extent. He was Dennis Rodman without Rodman.
Without
like,
the athleticism.
Without, like, everything.
Without the Rodman.
Like, he had everything that Rodman had in, like, strengths. And, you know, he was an expert rebounder, overall hustler, and, you know, just not as athletic as Mr. Rodman was. But, you know.
Yeah, I mean, Phil Jackson was he was on the team when the Knicks were the last relevant, or the last time they were really relevant. So,
also true.
Well,
to a full extent.
Don't disrespect the '90s Knicks. Let's not.
I know.
Ewing at least gets some sort of credit in here to some extent, but like, haven't won a championship in I don't know how long, right? Like, I think we're nearing 50 years.
It's over.
Yeah.
For a team in New York City. For a team in New York City, you expect better than that.
Exactly.
Shout out to the New York Knicks.
1973 was the last Knicks championship.
47 years. Owie.
And counting.
47 again.
Probably won't be.
You're gonna be in the 60s range by the time this whole thing's over.
Yeah, they're not ready to start winning anything anytime soon in that Knicks team.
Shout out to RJ Barrett.
That's besides the point. But we'll move on. I mean, my honorable mention for my basically my second favorite episode, it was episode 9. So it was last night. It was when it was another fulfilling episode with a bunch of stuff inside of it. It was about more of how Steve Kerr was involved in the offense, like in the Bulls, and how he had a relationship pretty similar to Michael Jordan with his own father being kidnapped and murdered and all that other, like, besides that. But Kerr, and then how he gained that sort of motivation to push his way, and how he had a similar like mentality as MJ. He had the Mamba mentality. He had the MJ mentality. He would do anything to win. He would stay hours in practice to shoot. He would. I was watching a documentary about Floyd Mayweather. He would work out 4 times a day, kind of like Mayweather. They would be constantly working out and trying to improve in any way possible instead of partying and doing these other fun things. So it's showing that Kerr actually had a winning mentality before he was on the Golden State Warriors. But it was very interesting to learn about Kerr's background, and then also how he summoned John Paxson inside of him, and how he actually had a big shot when they were in the finals against Utah. So very, very interesting to learn about there. And then which I thought was super interesting because, I mean, all I know personally when I think of Steve Kerr, I know him as the Warriors head coach. I didn't know him as the Bulls basketball, like basically shooting guard that hit some big shots, kind of like John Paxson. So it was definitely very interesting. And then right at the end of that episode 9 was the Reggie Miller versus Michael Jordan feud, which also was pretty interesting, showing that how Reggie Miller was basically almost had a chance to knock the Bulls out of the playoffs, because the Bulls literally in their how many years they made it to the playoffs during their entire dynasty that they had, they only went to 2 Game 7s. And this Indiana Pacers versus the Bulls was the only time they went to Game 7 in the playoffs, like, at all. So it was very interesting to see how they were this close, Reggie Miller was, to ending their MJ's dynasty and having him retire early. And who knows if MJ would have actually stayed another year if they ended up losing. So it was definitely a very, very interesting episodes, covered a lot of topics. So it was very, very enjoyable.
Yeah, I was just thinking. I don't remember if it was in episode 8 or 9, but I think we have to change one of Michael Jordan's classics games. We have to change the name of it. We have to change it to the Poison Pizza game.
Oh my god!
So I was absolutely shocked. Like, oh yeah, people in Utah poisoned my pizza.
I don't know if you should call it that. I mean, personally, I was something else.
Yeah, you should. I'm with you on this one.
Okay, they didn't. Okay. They put something in his pizza to make him have food poisoning. He came down
put something in his pizza so that he could have food poisoning game. There you go. Best title of anything in NBA history.
Yeah, there you go.
But he had flu-like symptoms, so it's close enough. And it was just crazy. I'm like, there was an episode of an old TV show I was watching. It was called Coach, and something similar happened to that when the guy who was coaching a made-up expansion team went up to Buffalo, and the whole team was poisoned with buffalo wings. And then seeing this, I'm like, this actually happens. Like, 5 guys delivered a pizza to Michael Jordan, and from that place, they put something in it so that way Jordan would be sick and they could help the Jazz win.
And they still fought.
Jordan dropped 38 points in 44 minutes. Like,
yikes.
If that's not GOAT material, I don't know what is. I'll take a quick shot at LeBron. LeBron would not have played in the game. I think we can agree.
I don't think anybody would have played in the game nowadays.
Nope.
Nobody has that kind of,
They wouldn't even be allowed to step
mentality.
On the court. Because they use germs.
Especially nowadays. Especially right now. You're just a little bit sick, stay home, quarantine, get into a hazmat suit, run an absolute emergency protocol sequence. There you go. That's it.
Oh, no.
I don't think we should make light of the situation, but I understand what you're saying.
All right, I'm going to go back to the whole Kerr situation real quick before we head on to something else here. When John Paxson left Chicago, Steve Kerr sort of had to fill in for his shoes and fill in the void. And Paxson left. Paxson was a knockdown shooter, clutch in the final moments. And Steve Kerr kind of had to learn from Paxson, take it back, and realize, okay, this is what Paxson did. Now I'm going to try and do that, only do it better. And some would say that Steve Kerr was just as good, if not better, than Paxson in what he did. Knockdown shooter, clutch in the final moments, and he took what he learned in the NBA and turned into one of the greatest coaches we see now. I think that was just very interesting to get an inside look at Steve Kerr.
All right. I think, it was crazy just to see Steve Kerr. I mean, I'm surprised they didn't talk much about the whole Steve Kerr on the Warriors and didn't really bring that much up inside the documentary. But I guess they try to stay more on topic with the Bulls. So one more thing before we move on. I was very surprised they didn't talk about MJ's return after his return on the Wizards, but I understand why. Didn't want to talk about that. I was thinking, because I was watching the last episode. I forgot to mention we were talking about episode 10 that it looked like it was going to end at because they were basically won the championship at the 30-minute mark inside the episodes. I was like, oh, they might actually start talking about the Wizards, and then they dragged it on a little bit longer, talk more about the dynasty. But I was really looking forward to maybe him talking a little bit about that, about his reappearance with the Wizards, despite it being kind of a stain to his reputation. But I don't know. It was interesting to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, you got to control the documentary, so obviously he didn't want to put that in. But the only reason it's a stain on his reputation is that he didn't get to finish his career with the Bulls, when he was with the Wizards, he was still averaging around 20, 22 points a game. So he still made the All-Star game as a in his second and last year with the Wizards. So it was not like he was a scrub, but it would have been nice to see him just finish his career at the Bulls.
Yeah, I also remember, before I let Matt talk, is that remember he's the only player ever in history to go score 50 points in two different decades. So that was very, very, very interesting to see him drop 50 points while on the Wizards, because I didn't know that. But I'll let you go now, Matt.
I think one of the more interesting things too, and the biggest what if scenario, especially for this MJ LeBron debate, is what if MJ would have lasted one more year? Just one more year, we could see rookie LeBron go up against late boy MJ, old man MJ. You know, that would have been interesting. That would have been something that the media goes, "Oh my God," and we just see that whole thing go down. And you know, it's just so interesting, and it's such a shame that we never really got to see the two of them go head to head. I can't imagine how cool that could have been to see the old versus the now, right? I think that's the closest we would have gotten to. When MJ left, that's when the whole culture sort of the NBA kind of shifted, right? And so you're playing in two different eras, the Jordan era and the LeBron era. I think that's how people see it. And I think Jordan is much better, just simply because of the way the NBA was back then, the competition he had to play, and all of that. But I guess you can make a case for LeBron. Doesn't mean I'm going to agree with you. But I think you can make a case for LeBron because of the way he dominated when he was with Cleveland and all that, Miami, when he won all those championships. And that's my opinion on that.
That's all right. We'll save all that till we go further or go take a deeper look into the MJ versus LeBron debate. But I think for now we'll take an end to this episode for now, at least for just talking about sports. Episode 19. I didn't mention at the start, episode 19. So this was our episode.
20.
Oh, one more till 20. Woo! So other than that, thanks for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed our Last Dance review on Just Talking About Sports channel, compared to something new, since I usually only do that in the announcements. So other than that, you guys have anything else to say?
All right.
I really don't.
Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys next time. See ya.
Peace.
Later.